Hello, my lovelies, and welcome back to another video. Long time no see, basically. I know I say that all the time. But yes, so I have another fabulous guest. Well, he's not a guest, he's basically part of the family and channel. By now, the fabulous Dan from Voice of Geekdom. I don't think there's anybody out there who watches my content who doesn't know Dan, but just in case, please subscribe to him. He does epics, and Marillion, and more content. And yeah, today Dan and I decided to do an elf. Well, I know. I mean, Dan, who are we talking about, and why are we talking about him?
Today we're talking about the very long-lived Círdan the Shipwright. One of my favorite characters. I think probably one of Tolkien's favorite characters as well. There's a lot to say about him. I'm
Yeah,
excited for this one.
yay! And
And
yeah, as you
thank,
said.
thank you for the generous introduction as well. Before we go any further.
Yes. So Dan is basically, my elf brother, although he denies that from another elf, whatever. So people, Círdan. Dude is literally the oldest thing around in Middle Earth next to Sauron and
Mm.
I don't know, Tom Bombadil. But yeah, no, we decided to talk about him because I do think finally he will get his role in a movie portrayal, and we can, weave that
Mm.
in what our theories are, what can we see, what's his connection with the ring forging and the Numenorians, because there is a big connection, right? But as we said, as we mentioned, he's literally old AF. He is in years of the sun. He's older than 10,000 years. So he's older than
Mm.
Galadriel even, who would be in Middle Earth the second oldest elf, still, around in Middle Earth at the events of the second and third age. And yeah, it's so let's start at the beginning. Where was he born, Dan? What's your theory on is he an OG elf or not?
Well, as you've alluded to, he was born in Cuiviénen, the birthplace of all elves, and this is where the elves awoke in the years of the trees.
Yeah.
We don't know for certain that he was the first generation of elves, which is, I think, your theory. I think it's very likely he was either of the generation of Elwë, Olwë, and the other one whose name I'm forgetting at the moment.
Thingol.
Thingol is Elwë.
Olwe.
I'm thinking of the Vanyar one. I can't remember his name.
Finwë.
Yeah. Oh,
No.
Finwë. Yeah, Finwë. Yeah. Sorry, excuse me. Yes. So he was either of that generation, which at one point Tolkien did consider that generation to have been the first generation of elves as well, but then he kind of figured out that didn't really work, and then changed his mind, and so they became a later generation. But they led their people because they were the elves that were chosen to be the ambassadors that went to Valinor first and then came back. So anyway, as far as Círdan is concerned, I think either he's of that generation or he's even older and he's one of the original elves, which I quite like that thought.
Yeah.
You see early on in the Silmarillion, he's kind of he's very wise. Even like early on in the story, he's thought of as being one of the wisest of the elves, which kind of suggests to me that he's kind of an elder statesman even at that point. Which is why I like the idea that he's one of the original elves, although it's never said anywhere. So
Yeah.
but yeah, he was born at some point up until 1130 or 1105. I'm looking at my notes here.
Well, notes are, dates are irrelevant here. But anyway, no, yes, I would agree. And as you said, because he has one very distinctive feature, but my question to you, because I still haven't finished Nature of Middle Earth, shame.
Neither have I.
Yeah, 2022 will be the year I'll finish the bloody book. But no, so the whole beard thing, right? So he's the only elf with a beard. And yes, that comes of age, that comes of wisdom. But I really do think it also stems from he has seen a lot, and he literally has, you just mentioned it, if he was one of the first ones, or the second generation with the three leaders who then became the kings, or four kings, that tried, most of them reached, some tried, to go to the Undying Lands following the invitation of the Valar, that has seen all the events of Middle-earth. And I do think that ages you, because we come to that question later, because my question is, was he really never in the Undying Lands before he left at the end of the third or fourth age? But the question is, he has seen so much, and I really do think that aged him, because he lives in Middle-earth, and Middle-earth, we know, ages the elves. Because nature is dying. It's a circle of life, basically, and they are part of this world. Although yes, they're fair, their spirit is not dying, but their body is dying with the world, right? And he has seen so many, he has seen, and will go through that, of his people dying, and the world changing. And I do think that aged him as well, and that is why he also gets this beard in a way of saying, he's wise, but he's seen a lot, and he's been through a lot.
Yeah, I think that's the message that we get with the beard thing, is that he's seen it all, he's been there and done everything.
Yeah.
So it's like the old man at the end of the third Indiana Jones movie. Like, he's
Yes,
there,
with the Holy
like,
Grail. Yeah.
yeah, the Holy Grail. I always think of him
Night.
when I read that, with Círdan with the beard at the end.
Yeah.
That kind of
And
feeling of that just old guy who's just been there and seen everything.
oh, definitely. And he has seen, many bad choices of elves, and will go through that. So yes. So one of the first elves, let's say that. Then they tried to, some of them did reach the Undying Lands. He didn't, because he was a good follower of his king. And I do think, have you, not 1,000% sure from where I have it, but he is somehow related to Thingol as well. So,
Yeah,
and to
he was
Ogre
said to be a kinsman.
of the
We
house.
don't know
Yeah.
how, but
Yeah.
he was some
Yeah.
kind of relative.
Yeah, exactly. So he stayed behind because his king, got lost in the woods, fell in love, then founded a kingdom. So he didn't make it, actually, to the Undying Lands, and he got stopped many, many times further. But he basically built, the most west, he established the most western realm, almost, in inside of the Undying Lands. And what I always find so sad, that Tolkien mentions this many, many times, that he is the elf. I mean, the Teleri have that within them, right? But he's the elf that really always wanted to see the light of the trees and the Undying Lands, right? So it is so sad he never got to, because he was so dutiful. He could have sailed, he was never under the doom of Mandos, he was not under the curse of the Noldor. He could have gone many, many times. And he knew how to build ships, and even later, we'll come to that, but he built one ship that made it. He had several attempts that didn't make it, 7 ships that didn't make it. But I think he could have reached the Undying Lands if he would have really tried. But he was never allowed to, and he stayed because he was dutiful and he knew he had a job to do. So I really like that about his character, and it's sad.
Yeah, there were a couple of reasons and things that were going on there. Just to
Yes.
break that down a little bit. So first of all, Thingol was in that trance with Melian,
Yeah.
and so he didn't leave at that point, and that's why
Yeah.
he missed the last journey of the island ferry.
Yes. The island ferry, I like that.
Which that was so that was why he got left behind, and that was duty that kept him there, because he was loyal to his kinsman.
Yeah.
And he's king indeed.
And his king, yeah.
So he stayed behind, but then he did build ships because during that period, Ossé was there, and he was
Yeah.
Ossé is
Mayar.
a vassal of Olmo, one of
Mhm.
the Maya of the sea,
Mhm.
and Ossé he teaches the Falathrim, they end up being called, how to build
Mhm.
ships, and so
Mhm.
Círdan was one of the first elves, one of the first people of any kind to learn the craft of shipbuilding.
Yeah.
Um, and so Círdan does build a ship with which to sail west in, and this is in the Peoples of Middle Earth. This is
Yeah.
recorded, and he receives a vision from the Valar, which
Yeah.
tells him, "No, don't go. Stay. You're needed where you are."
Yeah.
And then he sees a vision of a white ship that he's one day going to build,
Yeah.
and we'll get onto that.
Which spoiler alert is the ship. Then the first person, half elf, half human, actually reaches the undying land. Sadly, not with Círdan, on board, but
Mhm.
yes. So again, the Valar interfered and told him, okay, keep patient. You have to stay here. You've got a job to do. And I really like that. And with this we'll come through this. We'll get to this is also the thought of, we don't know, but he didn't have children. I don't think so, because he
Mm.
was rather like the foster father. We have many foster fathers. This is a big
Yeah.
theme in Tolkien, but he was the foster father of many and the teacher of many of these really important elves, and he taught them a lot. And now that we know, some of his instructions and teachings and learnings came from the Maiar and the Valar directly, makes him such an important character. Because I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, Círdan, whatever. But he
Mm.
actually, if it wouldn't have been for him, a lot of events, wouldn't have happened. They might have not won against Morgoth, and Third Age, Morgoth still would rule the world, and there were no elves left or whatever, right?
Mm.
So he had a very important role to play, and I like that he got many of his instructions from the Valar directly. So he was, in a way, like also, he was their vessel in a way.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. There's a lot of points during the histories where there are various battles that are fought, and he fights in some
Yeah,
of them and not in others.
yeah,
And very often when he is there, it's kind of like, oh, and Círdan was there as well.
yeah,
It's you look at the Battle of Last Alliance, and it's Gil-galad and Elendil and
yeah,
Elrond, and then Círdan was there too.
yeah,
But
yeah.
you're right. I mean, he's a pivotal figure in terms of his place in history and what he does that sets up
Hmm.
events.
Hmm.
That was all because of the Valar and his loyalty to them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And we don't have very often, the Valar interfering with the fate of Middle Earth, right?
mm,
We don't have that very often. So it is important when they give somebody a vision or tell somebody something to do. So yeah, so he establishes in the first age. Then he established in the years of the trees, but then it comes to the first age. This is when we hear of him again mainly. We learn he establishes a realm, for the elves in the uttermost west at that time. The world changed after the end of the first age. Beleriand drowned. A lot of these lands that were coast then are literally sea in the second age, so they no
mm,
longer exist. And this is another theme that haunts him all his life, that he loses his home, right? And
mm.
he is the one that always founds new places and gives refuge to other elves that also lose their homes, right? And I also really like this characteristic of him. And he's never because he befriends one of the most important figures, and this is the Teleri, after the kinslaying of Aqualonde, and he must know of this, right? I mean, Thingol learned of it, so Círdan definitely knew what
Mm.
happened between Noldor, who killed his people, right? So they killed his king, and he still managed, and managed to befriend some of the Noldor princes, and to even aid them, and to ally with them. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, and early on in the first age, he you see it straight away actually, because there's that feast of reuniting after the Noldor come
Yeah.
back, and there's
Yeah.
the I think the glorious battle, or the battle under the stars. That's it.
Yes.
And then after that, they have that feast of reuniting, the Merith Adethad, I believe,
Yeah.
and he's present for that. Whereas Thingol doesn't go. He sends a couple
No.
of his right
Yeah.
hand men, like high ups in in
Yeah.
Doriath, but
Yeah.
Thingol doesn't come in person to that feast,
No.
which kind of sends a signal.
Yeah. And Thingol is his king at that point, right? So we must know he never claimed kingship, right? Yes, he ruled over lands, but that basically counted under the kingship of Thingol in Beleriand. And later, I would even say, when in a way Nargothrond, well, I mean, it depends, but I would say Thingol was his king. I don't know if he proclaimed that and said Brithomba and Eglarest are part of Beleriand. I don't think so, but yes, de facto, from all these elves, Thingol was their king in Middle Earth.
Yeah, certainly he would have been considered Círdan's king, but Círdan's people are kind of separate as well.
Yeah.
They're separate from the elves of Doriath in a way.
Yeah.
They're kind of a whole vassal state in that corner there, in the west, on the western coast there at the Falas.
Yes, but if you think of it, somebody then later on, like Legolas or whoever, coming to Lothlorien and saying basically and knowing, okay, I belong to these people, right? Because yes, once they were, coming from Cumen, and once it was one tribe, right? And one family, the Teleri, those were the OG tribe of all these elves. So yeah, whatever. I found it fascinating because I think he could have claimed kingship, but he never did after the fall of Beleriand.
Yeah, true. You could possibly. I mean, obviously, Thingol had a son, so it would naturally pass to him. But
Yeah.
yeah, even after that point, maybe you could argue that he could have taken control of matters. But he had his hands full doing all that foster fatherhood that he was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. So he was not
interested. Power was never really an interest for him.
No, that's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned also about the kinslaying at Alqualonde earlier. And that was part of Círdan's storyline very much as well, because he was the one that first heard the rumors amongst the Sindar of what happened, and he correctly identifies that it had come from a place of malice, and that these rumors were spread with ill intent. But he does reach the wrong conclusion, because it turns out, at least as far as the way the Silmarillion lays it out, those rumors were spread by Morgoth.
Yeah.
And Morgoth, this is an example of him doing a lot of damage with kind of the truth in a way. I mean, he twists the truth because he
twists,
but he kind of uses like the truth to actually sow dissent here. And so Círdan actually he thinks that the sons of Feanor were to blame for spreading these rumors, because it's clear to him that this is propaganda. But so he gets that wrong. But in a way, it's kind of, he's smart enough to be tactful about the way that he sends that message down to Thingol. It still ends up with the Noldor and the Sindar, there's a wedge that gets driven between them, and Thingol bans Quenya at that point as well. But it could have been worse. If Thingol had have heard those rumors himself first and hadn't had Círdan there as an intermediary, Thingol is the rash one. He would probably overreact more than if it had come from somewhere else. You get that impression.
Mhm. And he might, I don't know, not might call him back, but he might have forbidden him, to interact with even the other Noldor princes, because yes, Thingol didn't. I mean, he was okay, with Galadriel and Finarfin's side of the family, so Galadriel and her brothers, basically, because they were also kin to him. They were Teleri, right? That's why he partly accepted him. He wasn't very, and you see that in Thingol very often not sending aid in the battles of the First Age. He wasn't helping any of the other Noldor, and there were also, Fingolfin's children and Fingolfin himself.
Mm.
So he was not, yeah, like you
But
said.
Círdan did. He
Círdan
did.
did, and that's
He.
what I mean. So he didn't tell him off. He didn't say,
Mm,
"Okay, no, don't send aid. I'm your king."
mm.
So he was in that way very independent thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, you're right. There's a I think there's a point after the Dagor Bragalak, but before the Nearnaeth Arnoediad, where orcs are invading Hithlum. This is
Yes.
when Fingon is king,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Círdan sends a fleet up to
Sense.
save the day, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And he attacks, and this is so cool because what we know is, the baddies are afraid of water. And Morgoth never dared to cross, by sea. He always took the land passage. And because Ulmo was very powerful and he never dared that. And in the waters, Ulmo's presence was always there. So he was very clever. What Círdan did, he had like guerrilla attacks from the sea, which is really, really cool. Yeah, because that was basically the navy of,
Mm,
of of the elves at that time, and it's really cool that he damaged them, and this is why Sauron later even came and sadly, destroyed the Falas basically and the
mm.
cities.
Yeah, yeah. It's later on. We're sort of jumping ahead
Yes.
towards the
Yeah.
end of the
Sorry.
first stage now, but
Yeah.
um, yeah, yeah. He does. He's very clever with the way that he wages warfare in that way. Because you're
Yeah.
right. As things get worse and worse towards the end of the first age,
Yeah.
he has to be clever and pragmatic about the way that he fights back.
Yeah.
And they're very secretive. They establish that haven at the mouth of the River Sirion, which is
Yeah.
hidden in the tall reeds, and
Yeah.
they kind of hide from Morgoth. At which point Morgoth has taken over the whole of the rest of Beleriand, but
Yeah.
they're still fighting back in some
Yeah.
small way, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's the end of the story. But yeah,
Yeah. And so what I mentioned before, that he befriends Finrod, and I really like, and very
mm,
often, when unlikely, it's not super unlikely, but these kind of friendships, and Tolkien always mentions that both, contributed from, like, it was good for both sides, right? And Finrod aided, I think, the Falathrim even in building, better houses, also partly in shipbuilding, and both profited from their friendship. And I really, and this is what you then say, he later came and saved the day,
mm.
even.
So you've already talked about the fall of the Falas, which was in
Yes.
First Age
400.
473.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so we should probably say, I think it's a little bit before that, because it was the Nearnaeth Arnoediad, I think, where Gil-galad becomes his ward, essentially,
Yeah.
and he kind of adopts him.
Yeah.
Gil-galad, depending on who you think his parents are,
Yeah.
gets sent to him for his
Yeah.
own safety at that point,
Yeah. Yeah.
basically. And then later on, he becomes High King, much later. Well, not that much later on, about 50 years later. So yeah, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, he's another one of these like foster father figures that the legendarium is just littered with.
Yeah.
You think about Bilbo, Elrond, all these characters.
Mhm.
um, he kind of is a foster father to Elrond, kind of a little bit. Well,
Yes.
Elrond's really young when he gets kidnapped, but then Elrond later goes on and becomes kind of Aragorn's foster father. So there's kind of like a lineage there in a way.
Yeah, you have the feeling. I had the feeling like the line goes Círdan gil-galad, gil-galad
Mm.
Elrond. Círdan was
Mm.
then basically something like the grandfather, the granddaddy of Elrond, I would say.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
more sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
but he was obviously still around, but they had many, very often Elrond and Círdan together with their forces aided, in the that's later on in the second age.
Mm.
But they fought together as well, which is really really cool. But I would say his first was Gil-galad, but also
But
Eärendil.
also Eärendil, yeah, I was about to say this. Yeah, he's also kind of a mentor and father figure to Eärendil as well.
Yes, and it's really sad because Erendil really didn't have his parents anymore because parents left
Yeah.
and died. And yeah, so that is really a cool story because now the prophecy, what you mentioned. Do you have anything before that? Any events before?
There's one other thing that we haven't mentioned, which
Yeah.
is the sack. You mentioned the sack of Nargothrond, or you mentioned Nargothrond itself earlier on.
Yes. Oh yeah.
There's
Right.
also a cool moment in Children of Húrin, which is, I think, it's the same year that Tuor comes to Nevrast as well, which is
Yes.
something else that we should talk about. But
Yeah.
the sack of Nargothrond, Ulmo gives a message to Círdan, and he
Yeah.
comes to Nargothrond as a messenger, and the
Yeah.
message is shut the gates, close down the bridge,
The
and just
bridge.
stay hidden and stay in your cave, and don't go out and march out onto the open field and confront the
Yeah.
rampaging dragon, please. And
Yeah.
that's not how it works out, because Turambar he's the Mormagil at that point, but
Yes.
he he advises, no, we can take the dragon. Let's go and charge and and charge out and just confront them in the open field, and that does not work out well.
Yeah, I mean that wouldn't have happened, if the OG king of Nargothrond would have,
Mm.
been still
Finrod would have
alive.
listened.
But
Yeah, he would have.
yes, Finrod really would have listened to Círdan. That I believe that. But and they were close friends, so he would have trusted him. Orodreth, he didn't. And he was a weak king as well, right? And therefore,
Mm.
he trusted Turin. Like, never trust that bloody man, please, anyone. Yeah, well, I love to hate Turin Turamba. But yeah, so he didn't he listened, to the human, and he was like, okay, yeah, well, let's try fighting. Because the thing is, at that time, Gondolin still stood. Yes, obviously Gondolin still stood. Gondolin was also
Yeah.
hidden, and yeah, maybe they were like, okay, we have to do something, right? So anyway, yeah, so the city fell, and yeah.
Mm. And this was, as I said earlier, this was the same year that Tuor reaches Nevrast. So this is
Yeah.
when Tuor is out and about looking for Gondolin essentially,
Yes.
and then he meets Voronwe, who was
Oh,
that.
but this is another cool story because
Hmm.
Voronwe is okay. So let's go back to the seven ships.
Voronwe, I think, is actually related to he's related to Thingol, I think, or which must mean he's
I
related to Círdan.
I
I
would
think
I would say so.
he's
Yes.
also he's also half Noldor as well. I don't remember which way round it is at the moment,
Yeah, because he
but
goes back to Gondolin, right?
yeah.
With yeah.
Yeah, so
So
this guy he was one of the, you mentioned the seven ships already earlier on. He was one of the sailors, the mariners who was sent into the west
yeah.
aboard these seven ships, and he was the only survivor to come back. And then he meets Tuor as a chance meeting.
Mhm.
It's not really chance. It's
No, nothing
it's,
is.
nothing is, but yeah, and he leads Tuor back to Gondolin, and that's how Tuor comes to Gondolin.
Yeah, I really like how all these events, then you're like, okay, so there's this plot point, this
Mm.
figure, and then it all comes together and makes sense in Tolkien.
Yeah.
George R. R. Martin, please take a note out of Tolkien's book. Anyway, let's not throw some shade. And here comes one of my first questions. So the seven ships he built,
Mm-hmm.
he had that beforehand. He learned of that prophecy that just one of the ships, would, or one of his endeavors would lead to success, right? And why do you think? So I don't think anybody told him, okay, build 7 ships, try that. He wanted to plead with the Valar, to aid them, right, in the fight
Mm.
against Morgoth. Why do you think that was not successful? Because again, those were Teleri, those were no Noldor, not guilty of any kinslaying. Why did they not reach the Undying Lands?
I think it's because of the Silmaril. I think Eärendil manages to get through the what are they called, the Isles of whatever they are,
Hmm.
and he manages to pierce the shadow and bewilderment that was put in place after the
Yeah,
closing of Valinor, the
yeah,
hiding of Valinor, and
yeah.
I think the Silmaril is what allows Eärendil to succeed where the others failed.
Hmm.
That's my theory.
Um.
I can't tell you
So
how that works, but it just seems
okay, but
important that he takes the Silmaril with him.
okay, I understand that part. But look, in the Third Age, at the end of the Third Age, they sail west
Hmm.
and they reach the west.
Well,
So
in the
what?
Third Age, there's the straight road, isn't there? So it's it's accepted that people can sail west if they follow the straight road. So it's
Yeah, but in the First
things
Age,
have changed at that point.
yeah, but not, but no, I don't. No, I don't think so. I don't think land wise, sea wise, waterway wise. I don't think the world didn't change in those parts.
Mm.
Just Middle Earth changed.
The shape of Middle Earth changed, but there was the straight road, which was put in place so that elves could sail west when they wanted to. And the ban that was put in place after the Noldor had left had been kind of rescinded at that point.
Yeah, but the ban was just for the Noldor, and those ships didn't
Mhm.
hold Noldor. So the elves saw other Teleri elves.
Well, Varonwe was half Noldor, though. He was, I'm pretty sure, anyway. I'm pretty sure because he was
Yeah,
definitely
but
he's
yeah, but
definitely one of the people of Gondolin.
yeah, but
Um,
I don't think Voronwar reached the Undying Lands. I think whatever happened with his ship,
mm,
he made it back alive. I don't know. He swam to the shores or whatever. He did swim there, or we don't know. But I always wondered, like, how did they not let those 7 ships in? It's
mm. Well,
pretty true.
it was not their fate. I mean, Eärendil was
I know.
prophesied
I
way
know.
back when Círdan had that vision.
Yeah.
Not, I mean, it wasn't that clear. It wasn't like
No.
this guy will show up at this time, and then you will make a boat, and he will manage
Yeah.
to get through to
Yeah.
Valinor. It
Well, there
was,
was a prophecy. Morgoth knew of the
mm,
prophecy that his downfall would come from Gondolin, and his
mhm,
downfall meaning
mm.
Eärendil needed to reach the Undying Lands, needed the Valar to aid to fight Morgoth. So, in a way, there was a prophecy for Eärendil.
Yeah, yeah. There's a prophecy that's mentioned by one of the elves in the Children of Húrin as well, if you remember.
Mm.
So yeah, there's multiple prophecies. Even if you go back into other versions of the Legendarium, it's even more clear that Eärendil is prophesied.
Yeah.
Book of Lost Tales is full of that stuff.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's my answer. Basically, is the Silmaril is the
Yeah.
big difference, and I
Yeah.
think that's what allows them to
Yeah.
get through.
Yeah. And I do think the Valar saw, okay, they're trying really hard here. Something is going on. We might better aid them. And I do think maybe Ulmo also played a role because he was the
Mm,
only one, who was still in contact with the fate of the world. And he knew in a way what was going on. So I think he also must have mentioned something in the
mm.
council, in the Maharaksa, the Ring of Doom, or
Yeah,
Ring of Doom, right?
no,
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so the First Age basically then ended, with him aiding Eärendil in building this amazing ship. And I find
Mm,
it fascinating that, the ship didn't just sail the waters, but it also sailed
mm.
the sky. Um, I don't know how that works. But apparently, the Numenorians even had a technology, that they also had flying ships. So
Yeah, I think Tolkien kind of backed away from that idea a little bit as the Legendarium developed. But yeah, at one point there were flying airship type things that the Numenorians had.
That was more analogy with real World War One and two, war times. I think he wanted to use, but then was like, nah, that doesn't really match this description of the world. One fantasy
Possibly.
ship.
And also, I think he was thinking about ideas about industrial revolution as well when he was writing the Lost Road and stuff like that. He was thinking,
And this is how Numenor.
It's kind of a sci-fi story that he was writing, where he came up with the concept of Numenor, and then it changed over time, I think.
Yeah. Good. So there was a ship, and he aided him in building it. So again, he had a big role to play. He fulfilled what the Valar, the job the Valar gave him. Erend reached the Undying Lands, and in the end, Vingilod played a pivotal part in that war because he was able to slay, like, literally last minute, Mordor, Morgoth. Morgoth brought in one of his biggest weapons, and those were basically the flying dragons, right? And Ancalagon the Black was literally the biggest beast you can imagine. So he managed to kill Ancalagon with the flying ship, with the help of the Cimmeral. I really do think the Cimmeral, as you say, played a pivotal part as well, because it kind of blinded. This is how you would imagine.
Well, the War of Wrath chapter sadly is super vague about that.
I know. But this is what people ask, like, how is it possible to beat like the biggest dragon, the world will ever see, who basically drowned a continent because him falling on a mountain, and then the mountains, the range of mountains collapsed and changed the world forever, right? So that falling dragon, changed the world. So who killed that falling dragon? A guy on a ship? Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if it was just the dragon that drowned the whole continent, because that seems I mean that is a huge dragon if that was the case. But
I think it's sad that the mountains collapsing was what then brought the water, because then water overrun the continent, basically.
I think it was also the sheer force of the Valar and Ulmo and whatnot attacking. And then if you think about Angband, it's like vast and covers like untold space underground. It's like the Underdark from Dungeons and Dragons or something. It's like where it's like hell. It's like hell, actually, in terms of like some mythological traditions. It's like hell being the underworld underneath the surface level. So it all collapses and caves in, and that's all because of Eärendil coming back and aboard the ship that Círdan was originally built or helped build. It was rebuilt by the Valar in between, though. It was rebuilt after Eärendil speaks with Manwë and so on. They rebuilt it, and that's how it can fly, because it's the Valar kind of enchanted it, I guess. But we're coming to one of my first questions for you, which is, why did Círdan not sail west at that point? Because he had that vision. He had that vision early on.
I wrote down that question.
Okay. So it's a good question, isn't it? I mean, so he had that vision early on that we talked about, and that vision was, you're one day going to build a ship. It's going to be really important. And then he does that, and then the first age ends. So why stick around at that point? Was he given another vision that we're not told about, or was it just because the Numenorians wanted to sail west to their island and he was helping with that? Or
no,
or did he have another reason?
I think his other reason was, as he was a foster father, he was also a father to the Falathrym. However, the reminiscent of the Falathrym then later on, and all the other refugees then in the Second Age after the fall of Beleriand, there were survivors, right? And they came to Círdan's places, right? Where Círdan dwelt and his people. And I really do think he saw himself, if he would have left all the other elves would be without a wise and good ruler. Maybe some would have gone with him. We don't know, was that possible at that time or not. But I really do think, I think he would have been allowed to go back, but he didn't, due not being told this time, but out of duty for his people, he felt. And then comes one of my questions, and he had foresight. And this foresight is a thing, and this didn't just come from the ring. You mentioned it beforehand. He is the elf that had foresight, and foresight is not
No, that's a
doesn't
really, really good point. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, this is like, gil-galad. We talked about gil-galad in one of my earlier videos we did together, right? And we said he also had this foresight to call in for aid for the Numenorians and all that. He wrote all these letters, to Aldarion's father. And I really do think he had that foresight. And foresight was not only the visions he was given, that was part of him. That was his power or whatever, right? So I think it was that.
I think it said that the power of foresight came to him after he was given that first vision. It kind of changed him. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure it says something like that in the Peoples of Middle Earth. I can't
Yeah.
quote it because it's quite an obscure
Yeah.
passage, but
But still, I think, if he was one of the OG elves, that all these elves had qualities, right? They stood for whatever, one was an epic good fighter, one was a wise ruler and king, the other one did have some magic they didn't just learn in the Undying Land. So I do think this, and we know in Tolkien very often things are just, when something happens or somebody gives you a ring or whatever, it just enhances what you already have. So I really do think he already had that, and this is why he was chosen as well.
yeah, it's a very noticeable trait, and yeah, it's a very good point that you made. Foresight is kind of one of his main.
Yeah.
It's slightly coming back to me because I read it earlier on, the Peoples of Middle
Yeah.
Earth passage, because
Yeah.
I think it said that that vision changed him, and that
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
he was given foresight greater than any of the other elves,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
aside from the Istari. So
Yeah.
only the wizards were more gifted in foresight than
Yeah.
him, which puts him
Yeah.
ahead of Galadriel and Elrond in terms of seeing the future.
Yeah.
Which that's one of Elrond's main traits, is that he can kind of
Yeah.
see the future, which
Yeah.
means that.
But in Elrond's case, I see it more, he's the wise lawmaster. I think Elrond very often guesses from knowing. No, I really do think so. I think Elrond his trait is more like knowing everything. He's literally like the library of Middle Earth. And when you know a lot, and when you know, oh, he always does this and this and this, and this is always the outcome, obviously you're wise, right? I think that is more Elrond. I don't know, but
Yeah,
when you
it's
what ring,
an interesting question of where does foresight come from in Middle Earth, really, because is
yeah,
it intuitive based on past experience, and it's very much kind of psychological and something that you're able to do by just being wise and being experienced, or is it something magical that comes from beyond and from outside?
I think in Círdan's case,
I
both.
I think it can be both, and I think in Círdan's case it is both. I think.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so too. Yeah. Good. So second age, let's come to the second age, because he kind of also shines in the second age, right?
Yeah, he was extremely busy in the first 32 years of the Second Age, because there are all these refugees here, and Gil-galad was in charge of the Kingdom of Lindon, but I think Círdan was his right-hand man,
Yeah.
and he was in charge of Mithlond. He establishes Mithlond, which is better known to some people as the Grey Havens,
Yeah.
and
And Lindon was
he's
split.
also in. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was going to say he's sending ships to Numenor. I've already said this, but he was the one who taught the Numenorians how to build ships, and he loaned his own ships to them in order to get to ferry them across to
Yeah.
Numenor.
Yeah. And I really and I think this might come into play in this show. So I really do
Mm,
think we will see the character of Círdan, because as we said, he plays, and later on in the ring forging and saying no to Anatar, and
mm,
a very important role. I forgot what I wanted to say earlier, but I think it wasn't that. Oh no, yes, Lyndon. So yes, because you must know that Gil-galad is counts amongst a Noldor, right?
mhm,
So a Noldor is ruling Lindon, but there were many Teleri, Sindar, whatever, refugees who were not Noldor, who did not like Noldor. You know, the survivors of Beleriand, their king basically hated the Noldor princes, right? So it
mm.
is very
Well, not
yeah,
necessarily. I mean, some of them, a lot of them were from Gondolin, of course. So those ones,
yeah,
Gondolin being a mixed society of
yeah,
Sindar and Noldor, you would think
yeah.
that the Sindar amongst that group would be more open-minded.
But Thingol's people not.
Not so much. Yeah.
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 And so he you know, they didn't go to the north of London, they went south, you know, and they lived under Círdan's rule. Obviously the high king was Gil-galad, as you said, the Noldor, but
Mm,
it was Harlindon and Forlindon, so it was a bit of a divided split kingdom, with the refugees of the, you know, the other kingdoms rather living in the south under Círdan's rule, which is very interesting.
mm.
And Gil-galad was never, yes, they were allies, but Gil-galad was never Círdan's king.
Not exactly. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was kind of his own man at that point. He didn't really have after Thingol. Really, he was his own person and his own lord, and didn't really
Yes.
answer to anybody.
No.
But he never took power in that sense. He never called himself
No.
a king or a lord or anything like that. He
No.
was just Círdan the Shipwright
Yeah. I
forever
think,
after.
isn't it Lord of the Falas? I
He
think
was Lord of the
so.
Falas during the First Age, but that was when
Yes.
he was answerable to Thingol. You know, he was
Yeah.
Thingol's vassal in a sense, even though he
Yeah.
still did exercise his independence even at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, after that point, he never really has a title. Interestingly, Círdan means shipwright. So
I know. So it's
when we call
basically
him
shipwright
Círdan
the
the Shipwright,
shipwright. Yeah.
yeah,
Because what was his OG name? Some
uh,
no
no way.
no way.
No,
Yeah.
I like to think that his second name is Jose. But,
No,
sorry,
it's not.
that's unbelievably lame. But
Yeah. It's like
uh,
a dad joke. Come. Oh, sorry. Kitty cats
hey,
saying,
what have we
yeah,
got here?
they were lurking. This is meat. They were lurking, and all three of them were lurking and just waiting for their moment to shine. Say hello.
Hello,
Hello.
meats.
Hello. Well, you have to go now. Doesn't like it. Well, good. Mama's busy. Okay. So, then what events happen in the second age? Dan, what's happening?
Brief mention for Vayantha, who was the first kind of Numenorian to sail back east to the mainland of Middle Earth,
Yes.
and he was met by Gil-galad and Círdan.
Yeah.
He's sort of a part of the Aldarion story, which you've done another stream about that, so a little plug for
Hmm.
that one.
Hmm.
Not a big deal, but I mean, it was kind of a big deal, but it's not like
Yeah.
much happened other than that. Not
Because
much to say about
Numenor
it.
they shut themselves for centuries, and just
Mm,
under, I think, the fifth king, Aldarion, I think, was the sixth king, so his father was the fifth king. So under his rule, that was the first time Numenorians left the island and went back to
mm.
Middle Earth. Before that, for centuries, they lived amongst themselves.
Yeah, I guess there is a bit more to say about that story, actually, when I think about it, because when you think about Aldarion mearned about shipbuilding and was encouraged in his, pursuit of traveling the oceans by meeting Círdan, and
Yeah.
so that whole passion kind of was inflamed by meeting the elves, and
Yeah.
that did change history. So it was a fairly important moment.
I do think Gil-galad was behind it, though.
Mm,
Gil-galad and Círdan were behind it
mm,
because they knew, a new shadow is rising in the east, and they knew they would need the elves were not the elves of the first age. They didn't have all the elven kingdoms. I made a video about it,
mm,
talking, about Region, and I've written the Linden video as well. I'll drop it soon, and they were not as strong as they've once been. Yes, they were, still. Lothlorien was there, Mirkwood, Elrond founded Rivendell way later. So there were not many kingdoms of the elves left, and they knew, again, Foresight, they needed the help of the Numenorians, and they saw, driving back and forth, how powerful they've become.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, a big important moment in history, and Círdan had his role in that. Um,
Yeah,
and it's funny because you think about him being the first person to have been taught how to build ships, and that came from the Valar. So
yeah,
really, this whole shipcraft thing was passed down
yeah,
via him, and that was
yeah,
that became like the main emphasis of Numenorian culture.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, we should probably jump ahead to, I guess, the forging of the rings next, because that's probably the
Yes.
next big thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So obviously, we probably don't need to tell that whole story. We have covered Celebrimbor on my channel, so if you're
Yeah.
interested in hearing a bit more about that story, check that one out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Círdan was present for those events, and it's said in the Lord of the Rings that he was very much against the whole Rings of Power, initiative, project, whatever you want to call it.
Project.
He and Galadriel were the main ones that were, against the
Spoke
whole idea.
against. Yeah.
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 It's not said that Elrond was particularly against it. I don't know whether it says one way or another, but it's certainly Círdan and Galadriel were the ones that were against it.
Yeah, he would, Tolkien would have mentioned Elrond if he would be,
Mm,
but I think that also plays in Elrond, still being quite young at that time, also not that experienced, and being an older, I
mhm,
mean Galadriel as well, but she saw through Anatar, and she's dealt with him for a long time. He killed her
mm,
brother, all these things, right? She didn't know it is Sauron, but she felt something was off. All the others didn't, because again, they didn't have this experience, right? So yeah, he played an important role, and that gained him also a role on the council, right? He was one
mm,
of the council members as well. And let's talk about the ring he then finally gets,
mhm.
because this is important. So he gets Narya.
Yeah.
He has it for a while, for quite a long while, throughout
Si-
the.
1693, the three rings are hidden, and
Yeah.
yeah, as you say, Círdan receives Narya, and this is the
Mhm.
start of the War of Elves and Sauron, which is
Yeah.
another big thing that we probably don't need to explain in detail. But
Yeah.
this was the big war in the middle of the Second Age, which
Yeah.
is as a consequence of the forging of the One Ring. Sauron
Yeah.
invades, and yeah, that's when Círdan gets the ring. One of my questions was going to be, why did he accept the ring? Why did he not immediately try to pass it to somebody else? Yeah, I mean, I
There
guess
was
there
no one.
wasn't that many other people that he could
Yeah.
probably trust it with. But I mean, he
Yeah.
was against the whole concept from the start.
Yeah. And that was one of my questions. Do you think he used the ring? Because we
Mm,
know all the elves who had the rings, right? I mean, I don't know what did Gil-galad do with his while he had it. Don't know. But Elrond, Galadriel, Gandalf, they used the ring and they did
mm.
good with the ring, right? Do you think Círdan did anything with the ring?
Well, this was yeah. I was going to ask you the same thing. I mean, we don't know that he did much with it. I think he probably just kept it safe and didn't use it. It's my impression.
Yeah. Because
Because
it
because
is the
that
ring of
ring,
foresight. Yeah.
if you think what Gandalf uses it for, he uses it to inspire hope and courage in the peoples of
Yes.
Middle Earth, which is
Yeah.
kind of Gandalf's whole bag anyway. But
Yeah.
Narya helps him in that endeavor in some way.
Yeah. But in a way, this is, what the places Kirdan built always stood for, right? They
Mm.
gave all these refugees another chance, a last hope, a last stand against Sauron very often. So again, I think he didn't wear the that is what I would say. I don't think he wore the ring. I think he had
Mm.
it for safekeeping. I think the others did wear the ring and use the ring later on. I think he didn't, and this is why he so easily gave it up, because this is also
Yeah,
important. He gave the ring. Oh, it's not the one ring, but he gave up the ring. So I don't think he
yeah.
really and he was still ruling over people. He still had a job to do. He still had to take care of his people. So if he would have used it, he wouldn't have given Gandalf the ring that easily, I would say, but I don't know.
This goes back to his foresight again, I think, a little bit as well, because even back then he probably had an idea that one day
Yeah.
someone will come along who's worthy of it and will need it more than I do.
Yeah.
Which is what happens.
So, question. So the study arrived, right? And they were given the task, but nobody knew of this. It wasn't like they arrived and they said, "Hello, we are blah." I don't think this is how it went down. I don't think there was a big event of them welcoming the study. I don't think anybody announced the study coming. So, do you think because he gave the ring to Gandalf almost right away? Again, yes, his foresight. Do you think did the Istari reveal themselves to Círdan? Did he know who are these people?
I think so. I think he was one of the few elves who knew who they were.
Yeah,
Very
because
few.
maybe also they came obviously via sea, right? So my idea is that also in a way introduced, that's my thinking, but I do think also was very much in contact with Círdan throughout all the, it's not
You think?
mentioned in the second. Yeah, I think so. And I do think because yes, Tolkien doesn't. He stops basically mentioning the gods, right? The demigods, the Valar. He stops mentioning them later on in the second and third age, but they're basically written out of the story. But I do think also was because why would he? It's not like they all went back to Middle Earth. I don't think so. Ulmo and also always were around these shores, and I do think that also kind of tip Círdan off. That is my thinking. I don't know. There's no
It's a
proof.
possibility. I've just written a video. It's coming out tonight as we're recording this about the actions of the Valar in the Third Age, and
Yeah,
I argue quite strongly that they actually do continue to intervene in various ways, but
yeah, they do.
they're just extremely subtle about it
Yeah,
compared with the way that they operate in the past. Which in the first age they're fairly subtle, but this
yeah,
is even more so. Um,
yeah,
and it may be because of the different narrative perspectives of the Silmarillion versus the Lord of the Rings, because the Lord of the Rings is very memoir, ground level,
yeah,
sort of narrative, whereas the Silmarillion is a history book.
yeah,
But yeah, it's a possibility that Círdan was in touch with the Valar still at that point.
yeah.
It
I
goes
think
back
so.
to the question of what does his insight and foresight come from
Mhm.
outside, or does it come
I
from
know.
him?
I know. Yeah. So yeah, so he gives up the ring basically, and then the whole story of the Hobbit unfolds, and we know he was a member of the council.
Mm-hmm.
No longer owning the ring, he still was a member of the council. Do you have anything more about that time?
Uh, well, we've missed out the fact that he was present for the War of Last Alliance.
Yes.
It's kind of one of those moments, like I said earlier, where it's kind of like, and Círdan was there as well,
Yeah.
because
So he saw
he's
men fail, right? This is
yeah. I was about to say he was present when Elrond takes Isildur up to
yeah,
the Samath Naur, the Cracks of Doom.
yeah,
He was
yeah.
there too. So
He
that
was there.
that epic scene in the movie where
Yeah,
Elrond says, "Throw it into the fire," and Isildur says, "No," and that's his only
mhm,
line in the whole movie. Um,
yeah,
Círdan was there too in the book,
yes, exactly.
um, which you'd imagine he would have been very disappointed in the way that whole thing played out.
He did because he taught the
That's
Numenorians, right? They were in a way also his foster children. Not really, but in a way, his foster children. He taught them so much, and then you see these people fail, who were supposed to save the world. So
yeah, yeah. I mean, he basically was like a grandfather figure to Elros, as we said
yeah,
earlier on, who
yeah,
was the direct ancestor of Isildur, and it's quite sad when you think about it in that way.
Yeah, think so too. And we forgot one thing. I wrote that down. So he also plays a role in the Anorians in the story of Arnor, because again, his foresight and him being super, saving the day. He saved or tried to save Arverui, the last king, right? Of Arnor, and he basically he sailed with his ship. He fled. He had 2 Palantíri on board. He had, I think, even the Ring of Butter here on board. So he sailed north, and he landed with the snowman of Forochel at the Bay of Forochel. And Círdan sent aid actually to save them, right? But yeah, anyway, the ship still drowned because the king didn't listen. Yada yada yada. But he also had his hands, in that one. So him and mankind are, and the line of Isildur, Anarion, all these ones. He's very connected, and you see that later on with Aragon, and we come to one of my last questions for the day. He's also very connected to mankind, which is important because some elves, just don't care, especially the OG really ancient old elves. But he always aided mankind and the elves, so I really like that about him. He's also, like Finrod was, a friend of men.
He was very wrapped up in the story excuse me, of the half elven as well. So he kind of saw firsthand what men and elves could achieve together. If that makes sense. I think it's probably one of his core tenets. It's one of his primary beliefs. That may also be why he was still present until the Fourth Age, because it was always the plan that men would take over at that point, and that's that foresight where he probably anticipated that. He's one of a number of characters that seem to have anticipated men taking over. And maybe that's why he stayed as long as he did, to facilitate that whole process, if that makes any sense.
Yes, no, he knew he still, had a part to play, and he knew when that was over, and, coronation of Aragon and all that. But even then, he stayed longer because he literally took the last ship that was known to ever leave Middle Earth to the Undying Land. So that is very, he was born there. He never left it for over 10,000 years, and then he took the last ship finally. But I really like that he left in the end, because in his heart he always wanted to see. He never got to see the 2 trees, sadly. Which is in a way kind of sad, but again.
And he always wanted to as well. That was why he wanted to sail west when he did, right at the beginning, when he had that vision. And
I know.
Didn't get the chance.
No, I know. Anyway, so what else can we say? So
well, we should probably say about he has a little bit of a role in the War of the Ring itself as well. So before we get to the last sailing and everything else, he it's a small role, but he sends a messenger to Rivendell for the Council of Elrond. And it's kind of funny because you think of Círdan being this wise, great figure in ancient elf, and he sends this guy Galdor of the Havens to the Council of Elrond, and he's kind of a bit of a muppet, because this guy he's the guy that kind of has all the bad suggestions that get shot down. He's sort of the figure who's there to just kind of be the kind of opposing point of view to the plan that Elrond and Gandalf had put together, the master plan and so on. So it's an interesting little character who is answerable to Círdan. Círdan doesn't come in person, sadly,
but you don't know if he speaks for Círdan, because events unfolded and Círdan didn't know exactly what they were talking about and what would happen at that time.
You don't get the sense that he's there specifically for the Council of Elrond, because the Council of Elrond is a spontaneous event that just all these people just happen to come there at the same time, and they have. And Frodo's there and he's on his quest, and that's why they have the council and why those people are present. So he's probably just a random messenger that was probably there was quite a bit of, to and fro between the Havens and Rivendell, carrying news and so on.
Yeah.
So he was just the guy that happened to be there at the time. But yeah, it's a small role, and then of course he's there at the end when Frodo and Gandalf and Galadriel sail west.
Yeah. And so one last question I have. So he had one of the seeing stones. So in the Tower of Emin Barud, whatever it's called, Emin Berait.
It's the white. Yeah, I think something like that. It's the White Tower that's on the Tower Hills. That's just west of the Shire.
Yeah. So again, I have a video about all the seeing stones left in Middle-earth. So one of the stones, but that stone is different from the other stones because that stone is not connected to the other stones in Middle-earth. It is seeing to the west, and there is in Avalone is also one of the master stones. There's a stone in the Undying Lands and the island of Avalone, and that stone, that is Círdan's stone in the tower, basically can only see west, right? But he takes that, it is said that he takes that Palantír with him when he leaves. And that I never understood, and I think I even said that in my video, because this literally means they pack everything. They literally take, the last thing and sail west, and then you're on your own, people. And I never understood, because the stone should have been the communicate, what is left of the elves there and of mankind to still have like their smoke signal, or still to be connected to the west, because that is, yes, men were not fully allowed, but then the good men did go to the Undying Lands, like Frodo and Bilbo and all these ones, and Gimli and these people who aided. So I don't understand why he didn't leave the Palantír for Aragorn to have still a teeny tiny connection to the Undying Lands for the men who are now left on their own. Why do you think? Because that would be foresight, no? Why did he take the Palantír? Did somebody tell him?
It's a good question. Never really thought about it in too much depth before. I suppose on a literary level, it's kind of symbolic of the fact that men are taking over and the elves are passing into the west, but there are still some elves left. Even after the last ship.
And we know elves literally traveled. It was like a shrine to them, and it is said, I think that was in the beginning of the Third Age, elves traveled there to see to the west. They used that Palantír to look west because they couldn't travel west at that time, but they used it, and it was like a monument basically for them. And they traveled there, and they looked into. So it's really mean to tell. I never got that. And
I don't think it's intended to be mean. I think it probably. It's maybe on a metaphysical level, it's like kind of symbolic of the fact that Valinor is closed from the world for good. It's, if you think of that as being like an allegory of death or the afterlife or heaven or so on, it's kind of it's as if we're moving on to a new period. Metaphysically, it's the world has changed at that point, and that's the moment in history that we're at there, and that's why
I know, but this is again, and I say this is not okay from the Valar.
The thing is, it's not useful at that point. If it goes west, it's fixed on Tolerancia, I think.
It's more of a symbol. Yes, it is. But it's more of a symbol, and they take away that. They even take away that from man. And, God made men. It's not like they are the stepchildren. They are just the second born, right? So it's like...
It's sort of paradoxical. It's sort of paradoxical in a way as well, because when you think about the White Tree of Gondor, that came from the West, and that's symbolic of the West, and that's very much of the West, and that's renewed. Aragorn finds a new seedling up there in the mountains with Gandalf,
and they cherish it,
and they preserve it, and that's sort of a symbolic of that line being renewed. But it's also symbolic of the West, whereas so is that Palantír.
Yeah.
It's called the Elendil stone.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. I don't have a definitive answer.
No, I know
I
it
don't
is
really know.
symbolic. I understand that, but it is, but why? That's not fair. It's like literally again
Mm,
the gods leaving men to their own fate anyway. But that was
mm.
just, yeah. When I read about Círdan again, I was like, oh yeah, right. He took that stone.
But what I like about that stone though is that Círdan does take possession of it. Once
Yeah,
Arnor falls, he takes that stone and keeps
yeah,
it safe. And it's nice in a way because he can look west for himself. Although it's also kind of sad because he can look west for himself, because he's looking where he wants to be, really.
yeah, yeah,
He still, in his heart of hearts, desires to go west and to be with his people and,
yeah,
to see his long lost cousins like Olway, if he's still around, and
yeah,
whoever else. And he can't because he still has a job there to do in Middle Earth. So
yeah,
it's a sad image of him staring into this stone, the place of his heart, which
yeah.
he never saw until the Fourth Age.
I know, but it's also symbolic because it never left, so he could still
Mm.
see it. So he knew one day, I'll go there and reach it. So, yeah, do you have any questions left, Dan, about Círdan or last conclusions about this elf?
I don't think so. I think we've covered most of what I sort of had in my head to talk about today. So,
Yeah. But you would also say in the show we will see him. It would make
mm.
sense to see such a powerful ancient elf. And I don't know how strong they make him. I never saw him as a warrior per se. I don't know if he'll be like frontline fighting because he wasn't in the War of the Last Alliance, not uh, we know of. He led the armies, he had his people fighting. I don't see him as a warrior,
Well,
not
we
like
don't.
gil-galad or
Yeah, I think he was a general, and I think he had some military nous about him. But I don't
yeah,
know. We don't know about him having any hand-to-hand combat at any point,
yeah,
really.
yeah,
Um, when you think about him sending the ship north to the Ice Bay of Forakel,
hmm,
he sent that ship out there. He didn't go himself, did he
no,
sent that ship out there, and
yeah,
he was fairly stationary for most of his life.
yes,
He did migrate. When obviously he had to because the continent
yeah,
sunk, but he did move at that one point to the Grey Havens after the
yeah,
Falas no longer existed. But
yeah.
for
He founded
most
a
of
city and
most
stayed
of
there. Yeah,
his
yeah,
tenure, he was kind of there in his seat of
yeah,
power and didn't really
yeah,
move.
yeah,
So that's the kind of guy he is.
yeah.
Which is a paradox when he's, the guy who's making all the ships. He's the one who's staying put, not sailing anywhere,
I
really.
know, I know. Well, he sailed up and down the coast, for guerrilla attacks on Sauron. Anyway, good. Yes. So I mean, he's not my top 10 character, but I think he played, as we hopefully pointed out now, people, an important role in the Legendarium, and he's often overlooked, but he was there from the beginning, and yeah, I like these characters.
Yeah, he was first and last among the elves of Middle Earth. He was there for all of it,
Yeah.
and you have to respect that and pay homage. And
Yeah.
as we said, he plays pivotal roles at certain points.
Yeah.
Historically, he's important,
Hmm.
and I do like the themes that are there with that character as well. The
Yes.
longing that he has to go
Yeah.
west and the duty that keeps him there. It's
Yeah.
it's an interesting character.
Hmm. Yeah. And I really want to see this foster father and this wise figure of an elf
Yeah,
in the show. I really want to
yeah,
see
I'm
how
really
he interacts with Galad, but also
yeah.
Galadriel, and because he was really close to her family as well. We don't know
Mm.
about her and him, but he was really close to her family. So
True.
I think to her
her
brother and
her
all
her
these
Teleri
people.
side as well. Because he's Teleri and she's half Teleri, or more than
Yeah.
half really when you do the
Oh, so they
lineages.
must be related then, actually, because
They,
she is always
yeah, not particularly closely related, but
no,
well,
no,
we assume because we don't know exactly
no.
what his family is. We just
Yeah,
know that he's related to the Teleri royal family in some
yeah,
way.
yeah, but they could
But
be.
But yeah, well, they would be. I mean, in some,
Yeah.
but it would be like third cousin twice removed or something like that. I don't know. Don't quote me on that because we don't know. But it would be a
Had it here first. Yeah, no, but I want to see them interacting. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely, and yeah, as you say, like gil-galad and Círdan,
Yeah.
we should see them both on screen because we will definitely see
Yeah.
gil-galad, and he should be gil-galad's like kind of one of his main advisors
Yeah,
in
I
his
think so.
circle
Yeah.
in the politics of Lindon. We will see him very often, I would think.
And when you think of the character of Elrond obviously being recasted because, Agent
Mm,
Smith was not available, and that character looks quite young. I think his name is Robert Arameo or something like that. And he
mhm,
looks quite young. So you can, so if you portray Círdan as an older dude, you can. You can obviously have this relationship of Círdan, the old guy, then Gil-galad in between, and then
mm.
the younger Elrond. So you can have that line of for foster children and grandfather and father and whatnot. So yeah,
Yeah, it'll be interesting for viewers who aren't used to the idea of generations of elves in a
of
way,
elves, yeah. I mean, it's
because
wrong to portray Elrond super young, like he wasn't.
mm, well, he's kind of ageless. He's described as being
Yeah,
he looks old and young at the same time. He
yeah,
looks youthful, but he's got age and wisdom in his eyes.
yeah.
Which whether that actor can portray that, I don't know whether anybody can. Although I would say that Kate Blanchett gave it a good try in the movie.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so we'll see. Young Ned Stark. He is a very young actor. You're right.
Yeah.
Be interesting to see who does play Círdan if we get him. Which, as you
We
say,
have
I
to
think
ask Fellowship. Yeah,
yeah,
I don't know. I think he'll be in the show.
we'll
Pretty
find
sure.
out one day.
I
Yeah,
don't think
I would think so. I don't know whether he'll be a main character, but
no.
he'll be present and he'll be
Yeah.
active in the politics of
Yes.
Lindon.
Yeah.
I would think.
Definitely. Good. Cool. So thank you everybody for till if you made it till here. That's always a big thing. And yeah, we hope you enjoyed this one. There'll be more of these videos coming from Dan and I and other guests. And Dan,
Hmm.
so you just talked about you'll drop a
Yes,
video.
in an hour and a half, as of the time of recording, so it will probably be out by the time this drops. I will have a video on the Valar in the Third Age and specifically during the War of the Ring, and it focuses quite a bit on dreams and interpreting Frodo's
Cool.
dreams, and also certain other events in the story of the Lord of the Rings.
Cool.
So that's coming out tonight. And next week, I'll have a live stream with Mr. New Better Do Better, who is the TikTok influencer in the Tolkien fandom. He's the viral TikTok guy who
Yeah.
does 1 to 2 minute lore videos of cool Lord of the Rings content from all 3 ages of Fada.
Yeah.
So I'm
He's
really
amazing.
excited to have him on because he's not really done a whole lot of guest appearances on other people's channels
No.
and so on. Yeah.
Have
So
to
yeah,
invite him.
tune in next Monday for that. Monday the 17th.
Yeah. Good. I like it. Thank you very much for coming back, stepping, like that was a bit last minute, but that's how we roll. And
Always.
I'll have, yeah, and I'll finally have, I had like a death in my very close family. So I was a bit busy and then the holidays, but they're finally this week will drop my top 10 elven warriors video, which is quite long. And yeah, that's coming on my channel. So anyway, we stop boring you people now. Thank you very much. Bye bye, my lovelies.